Hello and welcome to this video on approaches to develop the mental factor in higher PE. Today we're going to learn about approaches to develop the mental factor, and the things we're hoping to be able to do by the end of this video are to describe these approaches, explain why we selected them, and we're also going to look at analysing and evaluating the effectiveness of these approaches. Let's just remind ourselves of the mental subfactors before we start today's video. So we're going to be focusing on the mental factor, and we're going to look at two approaches to develop the mental factor which could help to improve the four subfactors of decision making, concentration, motivation and mental toughness. When we see the word approach or the word develop in an exam style question, that refers to types of training. Do not get confused here between testing or gathering data. If we see the words approaches or develop in the question, then we're focusing on two approaches for the mental factor, which are positive self-talk and visualization. Here are some common questions that you might find in your higher PE exam or a version of these questions. You may be asked to identify an approach to improve the mental factor, and all you have to do here is simply name it. You might be asked to describe an approach to develop the mental factor, and we're going to go into detail here and try and paint the picture to the marker of how you use that particular approach. As a follow-up question, you may then be asked to explain why you selected this approach, and you have to give reasons why you selected that particular approach. You might be asked to evaluate it and give its benefits and limitations, and you're going to have to think about what are some of the positives of using this approach and what are some of the negatives. Similarly, you may be asked to evaluate how successful it was in developing your performance, or you may be asked to analyse the approach and break it down into its important parts. So as I mentioned earlier, there's two main approaches that we're going to talk about today to develop or improve the mental factor, and these are positive self-talk and visualization. We're going to look at each of these in turn now. So we're going to start with visualization. So what is visualization? Well, this is about picturing something before it happens, and usually in sporting context, this is about picturing yourself performing in your activity before it happens, and it's used by elite level athletes or model performers. And when we describe this, we want to try and break it down into three stages: the environment that you're going to perform in, the emotional cue, and also the physical cue. And we'll look at those in just a little second. Where can this be completed? Well, initially when using this approach, you want to complete this at home, probably in your bedroom, where you've got no distractions. So we turn off the TV, we put our mobile phone away, we sit down and we close our eyes, and we're going to picture certain things before you take place in a sporting activity of your choice. And as you become more advanced, or model performers perhaps would use this in an activity, that might be before Mo Salah, for example, takes a penalty, or before Dustin Johnson hits a drive in golf. So there's three stages to this, and we need to describe these stages of using visualization in your exam if you are asked to describe it. There's three different cues that you need to remember, and the first is the physical environment cue. And that basically means, can you picture yourself in the environment that you're going to compete in? Can you think of the sounds, the sights, the smells? Can you see, where you are going to perform? If it's basketball, can you see the court? Can you see where the crowd would be sitting, for example? What does the arena smell like? Is it bright? Then what we need to do is think of a time when you performed well, and it's really important that we get positive memories here of you performing well in your particular sport. If we were talking about visualization in football, we maybe want to picture, you heading away a ball off the line, or if you were a striker, going through on goal and going round the keeper and scoring the winning goal for your team. These are positive memories that we want to try and visualize before we take place in our activity. And then lastly, we want the focus cue, which is where you focus on one particular skill from your performance. If that was basketball, it could be, you're thinking about the stages of taking a free throw and you're picturing how the ball would fly towards the net. If it was badminton, it could be focusing on the high serve that you're going to play at the very start of each rally. Moving on now to positive self-talk. Well, positive self-talk is an approach which can be used to improve concentration, motivation and mental toughness. It can also be used when performing a certain skill to help with our concentration. For example, before you play a shot in golf, you might repeat certain words or certain phrases in your own mind that will help you to focus on part of the skill, such as, keep your head down, or strike through the ball, or hold your finish. And that could be the same for in badminton. When holding the shuttle, you might think about just get a high follow through when serving. It can also be used, depending on the situation, for motivation. Perhaps if the performer is tired or if they were losing in a team sport, and they could say things like, keep pushing, you've got this, don't give up. These are all phrases that you can pre-rehearse and you can use when you speak to yourself either out loud or in your own mind to try and improve the mental factor. So when describing these approaches, we have to paint the picture, and these are some things that we need to include in our answer. So firstly, what was the approach? Who completes it? Where is it completed? Is it used in the activity? What was the timing of it in the activity? If it was completed at home, describe the environment that you completed it in. And then if we're talking about visualization, what were the stages that you went through? What did you do at each stage, and what did you picture in your mind's eye? If it was positive self-talk, what did you actually say to yourself? Try and give examples and give the situation or scenario that you then used positive self-talk. And also, how many times did you complete it? We want to probably be doing 4 or 5 repetitions of this over and over. On screen just now is an example answer for visualization. As you can see, it's quite detailed, and this person has gone into give lots of descriptive detail of what they've done at each stage for a game of basketball. Moving on now to explaining why we selected these approaches. Now remember, this is an explain question. It's asking us to give 2 reasons why we use this particular approach, because it's worth 2 marks. So we need to identify something, and then we're going to go on to say this means that in the second part of our answer to fully explain. Some reasons for using these approaches are shown on screen. They're easy to use as there's no equipment that's required. We can practice these at home, and we can then also try and practice them in training or in games. And lastly, they are used by model performers or elite athletes in high pressure situations, so we know that we can trust these approaches. We're now going to look at evaluating these approaches in regard to its benefits and limitations. When we see an evaluate question, remember we have to include a judgment here. So we would start with something like visualization was effective because, and then this means that. And I'm going to show you what an example of 1 mark looks like in a second. To answer this question, we need to think about the benefits and limitations of this approach, and I've put some of these on screen for you just now. So the benefits of using visualization or positive self-talk are on the left-hand side, and some limitations are on the right-hand side. So you can get distracted if you're not alone. For example, if you were to perform it in a busy changing room, or it can be hard to use these approaches in an activity, particularly things like positive self-talk. If the stoppage in play is quite short, it can be hard to use this approach properly. Here's an example answer for an evaluate question of 1 mark. So using visualization at home is effective. So there's the judgment, because it allows me to picture the subroutines of performing a high serve before I play a game of badminton. This means that I can picture myself performing the high serve over and over, so when I get to a game I'm more confident and I'm able to concentrate on where I want to play the shuttle rather than focusing on the technique, which allows me to find space at the back of the court, setting up a weak return for my opponent for me to smash. Something like that would get 1 mark. Lastly, we're now going to look at how you might analyse the effectiveness of this approach, and this is actually quite similar in terms of the knowledge that we're going to use. Again, we're going to look at the benefits and limitations of this approach, but how we answer this question, because it's an analyse question, will be different. So what we're going to do is we're going to break it down into its important parts. So we're going to try and identify something specific, and we're going to start with something like it is important that you complete visualization at home, for example. You're then going to give the implication and expand upon this. What does this actually mean? So we're going to say this means that. And then lastly, what's the impact this have? How does this help you perform better? On screen just now is an example of 1 mark of an analyse question. So it's important to practice visualization in a quiet space. So that's the identification. The middle part is the implication. So this means, and the last bit is the impact. So this leads to. Pause the video here to look at this in more detail. Thank you very much for watching this short video on approaches to develop the mental factor. There's more content like this on my YouTube channel.